Hey guys, tonight we're going way back to a time when peasants didn't have bug spray, air conditioning, or even window screens. The air's thick with the smell of manure and smoke, the sound of bleating goats and distant bells, and worst of all, mosquitoes. Hundreds of them. You're lying on a lumpy straw mattress in a timber-framed cottage, and the relentless buzz by your ear means one thing. You're about to get bitten. Again and again. You probably won't survive this summer without scratching yourself raw. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where and when you're watching from. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a narrow, muddy path lined with thatched cottages, your feet sinking into last night's rainwater, which conveniently hasn't drained anywhere. That's not just bad luck, that's prime mosquito real estate. Medieval Europe, especially in the warmer, marshier regions, was one giant bug buffet. Stagnant water pooled in everything from ox cart ruts to open wells. It didn't take much for mosquitoes to breed just a puddle and a bit of patience. You slap your arm for the third time and sigh. There's no DEET, no citronella candles. But you're not without options. Not entirely. You duck into a cottage where the walls are made of wattle and door-basically sticks smeared with mud. Inside, it's dark and cool. But even here, with the door latched and a bit of sheep's wool stuffed in the cracks, you can still hear the hum of wings. Everyone's itching. Everyone's used to it. Except for the baby, who's now howling because his tiny arm looks like a pincushion. Here's the reality check. In medieval Europe, people didn't think of mosquitoes as disease vectors the way we do today. They weren't dreading malaria, although it existed, and they didn't yet have the scientific understanding of viruses or parasites. Instead, mosquitoes were just an irritating, inevitable part of life. Like taxes, or church bells at 4 a.m. That's not to say people didn't try to fight back. They did, but mostly with whatever they had lying around. Mud, herbs, weird prayers, and even stranger methods. And yes, some of these solutions were about as effective as screaming at the sky. One mainstream historical fact: malaria, known in some regions as ague, was common in medieval marshlands like the fens in England or the Pontine marshes in Italy. Entire villages were shaped by the rhythms of disease and buzzing insects, even if they didn't understand the full connection. A quirky tidbit? In some households, animal dung was burned in small piles to fumigate the home and drive away insects. Imagine the smell. Actually, don't. You walk past a pond swarming with insects and catch sight of a thatcher brushing mosquito larvae from his face. The little devils are worse this year, he mutters. You nod sympathetically while scratching your neck. It's not just the land that's wet, it's the air. Humid, heavy, full of the scent of rotting vegetation and wet wool. Perfect conditions for breeding mosquitoes. You'd think people would be smarter about settling away from swamps. But the truth is, in many regions, peasants had little choice. They lived where the land let them, often on marginal soil near wetlands, because the good farmland was owned by the nobility. You pause as a cart rolls past, its wheels sloshing through sludge. The driver is covered in bites, and muttering something that sounds like a prayer mixed with a curse. Nearby, a small girl with a dirty face rubs garlic onto her arms. It's not to ward off vampires, it's her mother's attempt at keeping mosquitoes at bay. Historians still argue whether these early repellents based on strong-smelling herbs and animal fat actually deterred mosquitoes, or if they just gave people something to do while they suffered. You glance up at the sky, where clouds are rolling in. Rain's on the way, which means one thing: more standing water tomorrow, more bugs. You duck under an overhang just as the rain begins, fat drops smacking into the thatch. The air gets even more pungent, damp earth, wet animals, and the sharp scent of smoke curling out of chimneys. Tonight, you'll sleep indoors. Maybe, if your neighbour hasn't borrowed your bedding again. But don't get too comfortable, there's no such thing as a sealed home here. The mosquitoes know exactly where to find you. As you settle into your scratchy blanket, hoping your feet don't hang out too far, you try to remember the old woman's advice. Keep the fire going low. The smoke might just keep the worst of the mosquitoes away. Or you might just wake up smelling like bacon and sweat, again. Either way, sleep's a gamble. The rain stops. The buzzing doesn't tow. You wake groggy. Your arm's been chewed raw during the night. and there's a welt behind your ear the size of a walnut. Someone's already outside, tending the fire, thank the smoky gods. You stumble into the dim, early morning light and breathe in that familiar haze. Not mist, not morning dew. Smoke. Thick, rolling wood smoke, seasoned with whatever was available. Moss, damp straw, even dried dung. It stings your eyes, but you stand there anyway, letting the grey fingers curl around your ankles. Not because it's cozy, but because you've learned this is how you survive the bugs. Smoke is your shield. It turns out medieval peasants didn't have a word for mosquito repellent, but they were instinctive engineers of survival. They burned anything that could smoulder long and slow wet leaves, green branches, herbs, manuriand. They did it constantly. It wasn't just for cooking, it was for protection. The goal? Keep the air thick and biting insects away. You notice a neighbour dragging a bundle of smelly twigs and sage into her hearth. She's not prepping soup, she's building a smudge fire. The theory was simple. Mosquitoes hate smoke. The execution, less simple and a lot smellier, especially when goat dung is part of the recipe. You hunker near one of these slow-burning piles, trying not to breathe too deeply. The locals call this keeping the recon. Nice, right? And if the smoke didn't drive the bugs away, at least it gave them something else to complain about. Besides, if everyone smelled like an abandoned smokehouse, maybe the mosquitoes got confused. Maybe. One mainstream historical fact? In several regions, particularly across Eastern Europe and rural England, families maintained hearth fires almost continuously, not just for cooking or warmth, but as a passive form of pest control. The side benefit? A smoky home meant fewer visible bugs. The side effect? Your lungs probably hated you by the age of 12. But not all smoke was created equal. You watch as a boy throws something unusual into the embers. Rosemary, maybe? No, mugwort. That bitter, scrappy weed that clings to the edges of roads. Some called it dream herb. Others swore it warded off evil spirits. Here, though, it's just another way to spice the smoke. And maybe, just maybe, keep those night flyers out of your bed. A quirky tidbit? In some corners of Ireland and northern France, people would light smoky fires at the entrance of barns, or even lead livestock past smoky pits during peak mosquito months. If you're wondering why they'd bother protecting their cows from bites, it's because a mosquito-maddened cow is a kicking, milk-spilling disaster waiting to happen. You rub your arm again. The bites aren't stopping. They never stop. But the fire gives you something. Maybe a placebo, maybe not. And it's not just about being bitten. It's about the scratching. The long, slow itch that keeps you from sleeping and leaves angry welts behind. Historians still argue whether medieval smudge fires genuinely reduced mosquito populations, or if they were just another form of ritualized coping. After all, in an era without microscopes or germ theory, anything that looked like it worked quickly became tradition. You cough and move a little further from the fire. Your eyes are red, your clothes smell like smoked fish, and your throat feels like sandpaper. But at least, there's less buzzing. The woman tending the fire glances up and says, "Better smoky than spotty," then grins with 3 teeth. You're inclined to agree. You pass a pig pen where someone's lit a trough of damp hay. Thick, curling smoke pours out, swirling into the sky. The pigs grunt, annoyed, but bite-free. Almost. And while peasants didn't know about carbon dioxide or lactic acid, the things that actually attract mosquitoes, they did know that when the air stayed heavy and scented, the bugs seemed a little less relentless. Enough for a half night's rest. Of course, it's not a perfect system. You glance at a boy scratching furiously at his calves, standing just feet from a smoke pile. His sister tosses in a clump of dried nettles and says, "That'll sting the bugs off." You're not sure if she means the mosquitoes or her brother. Then there's the fire hazard. These homes are made of thatch and mud, with barely any stone. An unattended smudge fire could mean your whole home goes up like kindling. But that's tomorrow's problem. Today's problem has wings and a stinger. Sometimes, at dusk, you see groups huddled close around communal fires, chatting and scratching, as the sun dips low and the air fills with high-pitched buzzing. Some throw in lavender or rue. Some whisper little rhymes as they light the flame, half charm, half prayer. One elder even claims that if you burn dried eel skins, the smoke repels biting devils. You're skeptical, very skeptical, but you can't rule it out, not after last night's bites. Eventually, as the sun sets again, and the haze thickens around the cottages. You accept your fate. You'll light your own fire, feed it slow-burning weeds, cough through the first few minutes. And maybe if the wind cooperates, you'll sleep a little better tonight. The next morning, your clothes smell like a burnt hedge, and your eyes are still stinging, but your bites are miraculously not any worse. Maybe the smoke helped, or maybe the mosquitoes just took the night off. Either way, you're taking the win. You shuffle toward the village herb garden, where a cluster of women are already at work. They're not planting for flavor tonight. They're brewing what you'd probably call peasant perfume. It's less about smelling good and more about smelling wrong. Wrong enough to fool a mosquito. One of the women is pounding wild garlic into a greasy animal fat base. Another's got bundles of rosemary, sage and rue soaking in a vinegar bath. You watch as a girl dabs her wrists with a sour-smelling liquid, wrinkles her nose, and shrugs. Better stinky than itchy, she mumbles. Today, you're helping make your own blend. The recipe's never the same twice. Some folks swear by crushed tansy and bog myrtle. Others add onion juice, mugwort, or old beer. The goal isn't elegance, it's endurance. This stuff needs to cling to your skin, through sweat and sun and sheep. You smear a glob of your concoction onto your neck and hope for the best. It smells like an herb garden got into a fight with a compost heap. But again, it's not about impressing anyone. It's about getting through one more day without becoming a mosquito buffet. One mainstream historical fact: herbal repellents were a real part of medieval medicine. Physicians of the time often prescribed mixtures of aromatic herbs for miasmas, bad air, thought to carry illness. While the miasma theory was scientifically off, many of those herbs, lavender, mint, thymedo, contain natural compounds that mildly repel insects. You sit near a basket of elderflower and chew a sprig of yarrow, while someone rubs pennyroyal into their hairline. The sheer variety of ingredients is mind-boggling. Everyone's got a different theory. One guy even swears that if you eat enough onions, the bugs will hate your blood. You've seen him eat 3 raw ones today. He looks miserable. A quirky tidbit? In parts of medieval Scandinavia, people believed in something called mosquito spirits, tiny woodland beings that followed people home and made them itch. To drive them away, villagers would rub bitter herbs on their doors and windowsills. Bonus. They also believed sneezing while applying mint would double the protection. So that's a thing. Your concoction is drying now, crusty and pungent. It's sticky in the crook of your elbow, but you're not scratching. Not yet. A pair of barefoot boys run past, faces streaked with charcoal, shrieking like wildlings. Apparently someone told them that if you cover your body with soot, mosquitoes can't see you. You don't know if that's remotely true, but it's clearly working for their confidence. Historians still argue whether these folk remedies were effective, or if they just gave peasants a sense of control in an otherwise uncontrollable environment. When your entire understanding of disease is filtered through superstition, prayer, and the occasional traveling herbalist, even a bad plan can feel better than no plan. You pass a small wooden shack where bundles of dried herbs hang like upside-down skeletons. This is the apothecary's home. Not a doctor, just a local who knows more than most. She's stirring a thick green paste with a smell so strong you nearly lose consciousness. Wormwood and bear grease, she says proudly. Rub it in good, and it'll keep everything away. Everything? Even your friends, she adds with a wink. You take a sample anyway. Who are you to question centuries of itchy wisdom? Tonight, after the fires are lit and the stars appear like pinholes in a dark cloth, you slather your legs in your homemade paste. It's cold and greasy, but strangely comforting. There's something ritualistic about it. Like armor, you lie down on your straw bedding, arms still sticky from herb oil, and listen to the sounds of the night. Owls, distant laughter, and silence. No buzz, no wings. Could it be working? For a moment, you dare to believe it might be. Then you feel a pinch on your ankle. Of course, but just one bite. That's still a win. You roll over, adjusting your itchy linen shirt, and mutter the new village motto to yourself: smell bad, itch less. And you fall asleep hoping tomorrow's batch includes something a little less oniony. You wake with the sun already spilling through the cracks in the wooden shutters. Your ankles itch, your shoulders itch, even your scalp itches. But this morning, your mind isn't on homemade goo or goat dung smudge piles. It's on movement. Because around here, the seasons don't just change the crops, they change the very location of your life. You step outside and join a group of villagers gathered near the edge of the marsh. They're not harvesting, they're packing, rolling up linen bundles, tying baskets shut, and loading ox carts. It's not a full migration, but it's close. The lowlands are thick with moisture now, and that means one thing: mosquito season. You ask the old man tugging on a donkey's harness where they're going. He jerks his chin uphill. Dry ridge, he mutters. Fewer puddles, fewer bites. Oh, that's the unspoken rule here. When the marsh sings, you move. Seasonal migration wasn't just about chasing better land or escaping floodsit. It was a survival instinct against swarms of biting insects. Especially in regions like the English Fens, parts of the Low Countries, or Italy's Po Valley, people learned when to stick it out and when to scatter. You hike with the group for a while, your pack bouncing awkwardly on your back. Every half mile or so, someone stops to scratch. Others are already swatting, slapping, muttering. A mainstream historical fact: many peasant communities practiced seasonal transhumance, moving with the weather, animals, and disease patterns. While often associated with grazing cycles, this movement had the handy side effect of avoiding peak mosquito infestations. No one was calling it vector control, but it was clever nonetheless. By midday, the land starts to rise, the air feels a touch drier, and there's a breeze that doesn't smell like swamp stew. Fewer dragonflies, fewer buzzing clouds. Maybe you'll sleep better tonight. You help unload bundles of bedding and tools under a crooked old tree, and before long, a makeshift camp is assembled. Tents of wool and hide, open-air cook fires, and woven mats tossed carelessly under trees. Someone's already setting up a herbal drying rack. Of course, even on the move, peasants didn't leave their mosquito strategies behind. You learn that some villages have standing summer settlements and winter ones. The summer homes' rudimentary huts, sometimes even caves, were placed specifically in breezier, higher locations to escape not just heat but mosquitoes. It's not exactly a spa retreat, but compared to the buzzing swamp below, it feels luxurious. One quirky tidbit: in some alpine valleys, people believed that mountain air itself could kill the heat beasts, their lovely nickname for mosquitoes, so they'd hike as high as their legs would take them, during peak bug season even, if it meant milking goats on cliffs and sleeping in caves shared with bats. You crouch by the fire that evening, chewing on barley bread and listening to someone's grandmother retell the story of the man who slept in the swamp and woke up with frog legs. It's clearly a metaphor for what happens when you stay in mosquito-infested lands too long. Or maybe it's just a weird bedtime story. Historians still argue whether these migration patterns were conscious mosquito avoidance strategies or happy coincidences aligned with other seasonal needs. But as you look around at a village that has temporarily reshaped its life, just to climb a few hundred feet higher, it's hard not to think they knew, even if they didn't know why. You lie down that night with your feet slightly elevated, your head cooled by a gentle hilltop breeze. There's still the occasional bite nature doesn't give up that easily, but it's nothing like the swarm that lived below. The stars are brighter up here, the air is cleaner, and you finally feel like you can breathe. As your eyes drift shut, you remind yourself, in a world without science or sanitation, sometimes the smartest thing a peasant could do was just walk away. By morning, the sun is sharp and warm, but the breeze still lingers. You stretch under your thin blanket and listen. No hum, no whine, just birds and the soft creak of carts being unpacked. Maybe today, you'll finally give your skin a break. But there's one more line of defense you haven't yet tried, and it's not smoky, greasy, or stinky. It's clothing. You see them, your fellow villagers, already draped like medieval burritos. Even though it's warm, everyone's layered. Linen tunics, woolen wraps, hats with trailing bits of fabric. You pull your own shift over your head and realize, for the first time, that the scratchy wool cloak might not just be for modesty or chill. It's a shield. You watch as one boy threads thin twine through the cuffs of his shirt, tying it snugly at the wrists and ankles, a makeshift seal against intruders. A nearby woman dons a thick coiffe linen cap that covers her head and neck, and tightens it under her chin. She looks like she's preparing for battle, and she is. A battle against tiny, invisible swords. One mainstream historical fact: medieval clothing, even among peasants, was often multi-layered, partly for warmth, but also as an unintentional defense against biting insects. The long tunics, closed cuffs, and layered headwear acted as physical barriers in ways modern shorts and t-shirts never could. And even in the summer, most people didn't strip down. Modesty aside, fewer exposed limbs meant fewer bites. You scratch behind your knee and glance down at your own outfit. Linen shift, thick socks, and your patched-up breeches. Still, there are gaps. The bugs know where to find them. Someone walks past wearing gloves. Gloves! In this heat. But the woman looks smugly bite-free. So you make a mental note. Then there are the truly committed. Peasants who have sewn fine meshy eyes, medieval netting into sleeves or hoods. Rare, but real. These folks were working with flax fibres, twisting them into thin screens that could be worn over the face or windows. Not fashionable, but functional. A quirky tidbit? In some Slavic regions, people sewed tiny beads of amber or garlic cloves into the hems of their clothing, believing the scent would act as both a physical and spiritual deterrent. If nothing else, they jingled slightly when they walked, so if the mosquitoes didn't flee, at least the neighbours might. You tug your sleeves down over your knuckles. It's not stylish, but you're already scratching less. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants consciously designed their clothing as mosquito armour, or if the results were incidental. The debate is mostly academic now, because whether by accident or design, it worked. Fabric beats flesh, almost every time. The sun's higher now, and the warmth starts to seep through your layers. You're sweating. Of course you are, but you'd rather be sticky than scabby. Someone nearby has repurposed a wide-brimmed straw hat with dangling bits of horsehair, a rustic, experimental version of a head net. It sways as he walks, and he looks slightly ridiculous. But when you notice the total absence of red welts on his face, you reconsider your judgment. At the edge of camp, a group of children plays in a muddy ditch barefoot, bare-armed, and already covered in bites. You wince, just looking at them. Their mother calls them back and wraps each one in an oversized tunic before letting them anywhere near the fire. You're beginning to understand that, in a world without window screens or fly swatters, clothes are your last and best line of defense. They're your shield, your camouflage, your comfort, even if they make you sweat like a sheep in a smithy. You spend the afternoon helping mend holes in someone's overshirt with coarse thread and crude stitches. Not because it looks good, but because that tiny gap might be the exact spot a mosquito finds. As dusk approaches, you find a quiet spot by a hill, surrounded by buzzing that fades just a little at higher elevations. You wrap your cloak around your legs, adjust your neck scarf, and tuck your hands inside your sleeves. You're hot, you're uncomfortable, but tonight, you're not getting bitten. And in this world, that's about as good as it gets. Even with all the smoke and the sweating and the strange herbal goop still clinging to your elbows, you know the mosquitoes aren't done with you yet, not even close. So today, you try something a little more mystical. You're not alone. Everyone's a little superstitious out here. When you live by the whims of the weather and your crops depend on the moods of the sky, you tend to believe in forces you can't see. And when something invisible keeps biting you in the night, well, that sounds like spirit work to most medieval minds. You join an old woman sitting cross-legged on a flat rock. Her name is something soft and hard at once. Mela, maybe, but everyone just calls her Mother Smoke. She's not a witch, officially. She's just a little peculiar. And people listen to her when the flies come out. She dips her fingers into a pot of what looks like thin mud and smears it in quick circles onto her calves. Cools the bite, she mutters. Confuses the biter. You raise an eyebrow. Confuses it. How? They can't smell what's not you, she says, as if that explains everything. You try it. The mud is cool, gritty, and oddly soothing. And suddenly, you're part of an ancient, awkward skincare routine, one that probably predates written language. One mainstream historical fact? People across ancient and medieval societies used mud not just to treat bites, but as a preemptive coating. It cooled the skin, blocked scent, and created a thin barrier. Whether it really worked on mosquitoes is still up for debate, but it sure felt like doing something. You catch sight of a boy with tiny bones tied to his belt. Chicken, maybe? Bird skulls? It's not fashion, it's protection. Folk charms like this were believed to ward off blood spirits, not just metaphorical ones, literal, buzzing ones too. The logic was somewhere between superstition and desperation. And there's more. You meet a farmer who swears that burying a single clove of garlic under your doorstep keeps blood-sucking insects from entering. Another insists on hanging a dead snake near the livestock pen to scare off predators, but mosquitoes. Snakes suck venom, bugs fear it, he explains confidently. That doesn't really make sense, but you nod anyway. A quirky tidbit? In parts of southern France, some villagers wore amulets carved from boar tusks dipped in vinegar, claiming it made their blood bitter to pests. If it didn't work, at least they looked feral and fabulous. You glance at your own collection of oddities. A sprig of thyme tucked behind your ear, a pouch of dried lavender at your belt, and now this lovely mud coating that's drying into a delicate crust. You're basically a walking salad, but even if none of it keeps the mosquitoes away, it gives you something more valuable than relief. It gives you hope. The kind of quiet, sleepy hope that maybe, just maybe, you'll wake up tomorrow without another welt on your collarbone. Historians still argue whether these magical practices had any measurable impact, or if they were just part of a wider medieval tendency to spiritualize every form of suffering. But what's clear is that belief mattered. And for peasants, believing you had some agency, some weapon, even if it was garlic and prayer, meant everything. As the sun begins to slide behind the hills, Mother Smoke lights a small bundle of dried mint and wormwood and waves the smoke in slow loops over your head. For your dreams, she whispers, to keep the biters out of your sleep. You want to laugh, but you also don't want to jinx it. As you lie down later in your scratchy bedding, legs still streaked with cooling mud, you feel something you haven't felt in days, calm, protected, in a strange and slightly crunchy way. And just before sleep takes you, you whisper a little rhyme you heard a child say earlier, half serious and half mockery. Blood bugs bite me, they'll get cursed. May their wings fall off and their bellies burst. Childish? Definitely. But hey, if it helps, you'll sing it again tomorrow. You stir awake to the soft knock of a breeze slipping through the wall slats. And for once, the air doesn't feel like soup. It's moving cool, dry, whispering around your cheeks. You don't even hear the usual dawn chorus of buzzing near your ears. Could it be that today, you owe your peace not to mud or smoke or mystical nonsense but to architecture? You roll off your bedding and stretch, blinking up at the crooked beams of your temporary hilltop shelter. It's not much wattle and daub walls, patched thatch roof, but you notice something important. Gaps. Not careless ones, but high, narrow slits near the ceiling where air can flow through. You step outside and glance around. Several of the huts here are built off the ground entirely, resting on low stilts or stone bases. Not for dramatic flair, but because airflow matters. And when you're trying to avoid a predator that thrives in stagnant air and still puddles, circulation might just save your hide. A mainstream historical fact? In many marshy regions, especially in parts of southern Europe and Southeast Asia, stilted buildings were common. While often used to avoid flooding or vermin, the raised design also improved airflow, reducing the damp, humid conditions mosquitoes adore. Whether the builders knew this or note it worked, you peer up at the roof slanted, steep, often lopsided but deliberate. These weren't just for shedding rain. They helped hot air rise, carrying smoke and moisture out. If you're lucky, the thatch itself was treated with ash, or even soaked in herbal waterless for flammability, and more to keep pests from nesting inside. And then there's the layout of the village. You walk down a narrow lane, noting that the huts aren't crowded too tightly. There are little spaces between homes, not just for movement but for wind, drafts, the kind of invisible force that mosquitoes hate. One quirky tidbit: in some parts of Germany, villagers added tiny clay chimney snot for cooking smoke, but to draw air upward through homes, even in windless heat. These primitive ventilation tricks weren't flashy, but they showed a surprising understanding of the mosquito's weakness. It needs stillness. Your drafty, breezy, leaky house? That's a death trap for them. You crawl back inside your shelter and lie still. The air isn't cold exactly, but it moves enough to keep sweat from clinging. And more importantly, it keeps the bugs guessing. Historians still argue whether medieval architecture evolved because of mosquito avoidance, or if these features were lucky coincidences driven by weather, local materials, or flood control. But the benefit remains the same. Airflow equals fewer bites. In wealthier regions, stone structures might have provided better protection, but peasants made do with what they had. And sometimes, what they had, drafts, slits, and accidentally outperformed even the nobility's sealed chambers. You visit the village's communal longhouse used, during harvest or feast days. It's massive, with beams the width of tree trunks and holes punched high in the walls. You stand at one end and feel the wind roll through like a soft tide. Even with livestock penned at one side and smoke drifting lazily upward, the place smells okay. Not like swamp, not like stale hay, just air, moving air. Tonight, you ask an elder if you can sleep in the longhouse loft. Too drafty, he warns. You'll catch cold. You smile and nod. But inside, you know, too drafty for him might mean perfect for you. As evening settles, you climb into your corner and let the air cradle you. There's no garlic paste on your neck tonight, no mud on your knees, just wind and wood and the silent, invisible shield of good design. Maybe the best protection isn't about what you rub, burn or chant. Maybe it's just about letting the wind do its job. You're crouched by a pond now, a patch of morning sun warming your back as you watch the surface tremble. Not from wind, from larvae. Hundreds snow, thousands soft tiny wrigglers twisting just below the surface, undisturbed and hungry. This pond, shallow and murky, is a mosquito nursery, and it's surrounded by peasants who've finally decided to fight back not with herbs or smoke or spells this time, but with something hungrier. You hear the faint quack before you see them. Ducks, dozens of them, paddling in a slow circle. Then come the frogs plop diving into the shallows like nervous acrobats. Behind you, a barefoot boy tosses bits of bread into the water, encouraging the frenzy. This, you realize, is pest control, peasant style. One mainstream historical fact: in regions where standing water was unavoidable, peasants learned to cultivate creatures that would eat mosquito larvae. Ducks, frogs, even certain fish species were introduced to ponds and ditches, not out of scientific strategy, but because over time they noticed something. Where these animals thrived, the biting lessened. A girl shows off her prized fisher type of carp kept in a barrel-fed trough. He's a greedy one, she says proudly. Eats the little worms all day. You nod, watching the water ripple again. It's not exactly a laboratory, but it's nature doing what nature does: devour the nuisance. And then there's the bird guy. Every village has one, the eccentric, with a fondness for feathers and an unsettling collection of bird bones. This one trains swallows. Yes, swallows. He's built little wooden ledges above his hut and whistles strange melodies to coax them down. You glance up to see a swirl of birds circling, diving, and if you're lucky, snatching a few airborne mosquitoes mid-flight. He claims his hut has fewer bites than anyone else's, and honestly, it's hard to argue when his arms are bite-free and your left elbow looks like a battlefield. One quirky tidbit: in parts of early medieval Italy, people believed barn swallows were sacred protectors of homes precisely because they ate insects. It was considered bad luck, dangerous even to knock down a swallow's nest from your rafters, not just because it angered the saints, but because it invited the bugs back. You kneel near a shallow ditch where someone's tied bundles of reeds into little floating islands. These aren't decorations. They're nesting spot-safe havens for frogs and toads, which villagers welcome like honoured guests. You never thought you'd see someone coo at a toad, but there it is. Historians still argue whether these biological defences were deliberately orchestrated or just clever byproducts of sustainable living. But when you consider the patterns, the way ponds were stocked, birds were nurtured, and frogs were protected, it starts to look like a quiet strategy. An instinctive understanding that fighting mosquitoes meant partnering with predators. Later that day, you help repair a low stone wall around a small stream-fed pool. It's shallow and slow-moving, perfect for breeding if left alone. But not here. Here, the pool teems with tiny fish darting in every direction, their tails flashing silver. Someone throws in a few breadcrumbs. The fish swarm. The larvae disappear. That night, the air hums as usual, but it's noticeably lighter near the pond. Fewer wings, fewer pinches. You watch the ducks huddle in the moonlight, heads tucked under wings, as frogs resume their croaking chorus. You lie down not in a hut tonight, but near the pond's edge, your bedroll carefully placed under a willow tree. Brave? Maybe. But the peasant next to you smiles and says, "No better guardians than frogs." You believe him, because when it comes to surviving in a medieval world with no medicine, no science, and no bug zappers, you learn quickly. The more allies you have, even if they quack or croak, the better. Tonight, you're not gambling. No more muddy ankles, no more garlic in grease. and no more praying that the ducks eat faster. Tonight, you're going to bed behind a net. Not everyone has one, only a few families in the village are lucky enough, but tonight, you're one of them. You duck inside the small cottage, where the air is warm and still smells faintly of smoke and herbs. But there, hanging from the rafters above the bed like a ghost's curtain, is a fine mesh canopy made of tightly woven flax. You touch it gently. It's rougher than anything you'd expect from a modern screen. But here, it's luxury. An invisible wall between you and the bitey little monsters of the night. You slip underneath it, careful not to lift it too high. One stray mosquito hitching a ride would ruin the whole point. Once you're inside, it feels like a cocoon. You settle onto the straw mattress, and for the first time in days, you let your arms rest on top of the blanket. One mainstream historical fact: though rare among the poor, mosquito netting has existed in various forms since ancient times. Flax or hemp fabric finely spun and hand-woven could be stretched across sleeping areas. In wealthier households or monastic settings, netted curtains were more common, but some resourceful peasants fashioned makeshift versions using fishing nets, lace-like linen, or layers of gauzy cloth treated with herbs. You can't help but feel a little smug tonight. You're one of the few in the village protected behind these blessed threads. As you lie there, you hear a child outside crying, the telltale sound of someone who's been bitten awake. Then, thwack, a frustrated adult slapping their own neck, followed by a muffled curse. It almost makes you feel guilty. Almost. A quirky tidbit? In some parts of Eastern Europe, flax nets were stitched with symbolic shape stars, circles, or even small saints, meant not just to physically stop mosquitoes, but to trap their spirits. One Polish legend claimed that if a mosquito entered a net with a six-pointed star embroidered at its center, it would become dizzy and fall asleep before it could bite. Medieval logic at its finest. You trace a finger over the seam of your own net. No stars, but the stitching is tight and the weave fine. This is probably the work of a patient grandmother, squinting by firelight for weeks to get the pattern just right. You say a silent thank you to her handiwork. Historians still argue whether mosquito nets were widely available to peasants, or just a lucky coincidence when someone had the right materials and too much time. But archaeological fragments of net-like textiles have been found in rural homesteads, suggesting at least some clever villagers figured it out. Not everyone uses proper netting. You've seen some wrap themselves in cloaks suspended from ceiling beams, or hang strips of cloth like curtains around sleeping mats. In winter, that's about warmth. But in summer, it's about defense. Some even rub their nets with herbs, lavender, sage, or minthoping. The scent adds an extra layer of deterrent. You sniff the edge of your own sheet and catch a faint whiff of rosemary. Clever. As you lie back, you stare at the wooden ceiling beams, faintly lit by the moon. You hear the occasional buzz close, but not inside. Outside the net, a small moth bounces against the walls. Somewhere nearby, a donkey brays. But within your gauzy bubble, it's peace. For now, you think of all the peasants still tossing and scratching on bare mats tonight, all the tricks and hopes and half-magical solutions, and here you are, received by a rectangle of fabric. Not exactly armor, but it feels like it. You stretch your legs a little further, savoring the simple freedom of not curling into a ball to protect your limbs. No need to keep your arms tucked or your face buried. For once, you don't need to hide from sleep. You smile as you whisper, "Let them buzz. They'll find no feast here." And the only thing biting tonight is the cool air against your toes. You wake, refreshed. Actually refreshed for the first time in days. No new bites. No angry welts. The net held. It worked. You're still half expecting to find one sneaky mosquito camped inside with you, but no, just the gentle scent of old flax and a breeze wafting through the shutter cracks. You step outside, stretch your arms, and are immediately smacked in the face by incense smoke. Not the mosquito-fighting kind from dung or herbs, but the religious kind, thick with resin and reverence. Today is a holy day, and that means incense, bells, and a long sermon delivered in Latin, which no one fully understands but everyone endures. And here's where things take a turn. Because as you file into the village chapel with the others, you realize something odd. People here believe the mosquitoes aren't just a nuisance, they're punishment. You settle onto a wooden bench, swatting your ankle as the priest launches into a booming address. The Latin rolls out like thunder, punctuated by dramatic gestures. Then the villager beside you whispers a summary. The mosquitoes are here because we've sinned again. Of course they are. One mainstream historical fact: medieval people often linked illness and pestilence, a mosquito born or otherwise, to divine wrath. Miasma theory explained disease through bad air, yes, but underlying that was a moral layer. If your village was plagued by sickness or bites, clearly you had offended God. And mosquitoes? They were seen as lesser Demosthenes tormentors sent to remind you of your place. The priest swings the incense burner again, thickening the air with frankincense and myrrh. It smells like old trees and candle wax and holy guilt. Coincidentally, maybe not, the mosquitoes don't seem to like it either. The biting slows in the pews, if only briefly. Then come the prayers, special ones today, directed not just at saints and martyrs, but at Saint Dominic of Silos, known in some corners of Spain for protecting livestock from insect-borne disease. You mouth the words, unsure whether to believe or just hope. A quirky tidbit: in rural parts of Italy and France, some peasants crafted wax effigies of mosquitoes and offered them to the church, asking saints to banish the blood thieves. These little insect sculptures were sometimes nailed to chapel doors, like sinners needing public shaming. After the sermon, the priest blesses bundles of dried herbs, basil, rue, lavender, and hands them out like sacred talismans. The villagers tie them to doorways and windows, sometimes burning them as offerings, other times just letting them hang like medieval air fresheners with a side of spiritual insurance. You visit the home of an older couple who've placed a crude wooden crucifix at every window. The wife tells you they recite a short prayer each night before bed, asking angels to guard their sleep from the flying afflictions. You nod solemnly and politely, don't mention that her arm looks like a battlefield. Historians still argue whether these religious practices truly intersected with pest control, or if they were simply another layer of ritual comfort. But here, in this moment, it's all blended. The saints, the smoke, the charms, they all form a shield. Not physical perhaps, but emotional, psychological. And in a life this uncertain, that's enough. You hear stories over the next few days. Tales of a monk who could command bugs with his prayers. Of a village that supposedly went bite-free for a whole summer after marching barefoot around its borders while chanting psalms. There's even one man who swears he saw a mosquito burst into flames after touching holy water. You don't ask questions. That night, a group gathers near the chapel, lighting candles and chanting softly. You stand in the back, a little skeptical, but unwilling to break the mood. The wind carries their voices gently up the hill. Somewhere nearby, a donkey sneezes. You almost smile. As you walk back to your shelter, your net still safely tied above your bedding, you carry a sprig of priest-blessed basil behind your ear, just in case. You no longer care whether it's the herbs, the architecture, the frogs, or divine intervention. You'll take whatever protection you can get. It's midday now, and the sky's a shade of lazy blue. You're walking along the edge of the village fields when your foot sinks again into a patch of muddy ground that should have been dry by now. You curse under your breath and hop out, only to realize, yep, standing water, a puddle that's been collecting all week, complete with larvae if you look closely enough. You stare at it. You know what it means. You've learned this lesson the hard way. Puddles mean mosquitoes, and mosquitoes mean no sleep and itchy regrets. So you ask the obvious question, why haven't they drained it? Turns out, you're not the first to wonder that. Drainage, or the lack thereof, is a quiet curse whispered in many medieval villages. If they'd just carved a few proper ditches, maybe laid a simple channel, or rerouted runoff, wouldn't this mosquito mess be half the problem it is? But here's the complicated part. Draining swamps wasn't that easy. Not in this time. Not for peasants. One mainstream historical fact? Large-scale drainage efforts did exist in medieval Europe, particularly in the Low Countries and parts of England. The Dutch were already experimenting with dikes and canals in the 12th century. Monastic orders like the Cistercians often engineered marsh reclamation projects to expand usable farmland. But these were elite endeavours, requiring knowledge, manpower, and most importantly permission. You're a peasant. You don't own the land. You don't get to reshape it. If the Lord says the marsh stays marshy, then so it does. You trudge toward the edge of the village, where someone's hacked a rough trench to drain a pool near the pigsty. It's shallow, crooked, and ends nowhere in particular. The water sits lazily in it, unmoved. Best we can do, the man digging says. Soil's wrong. Won't take a slope. And even when ditches are dug, they often become mosquito traps themselves, little canals of slow-moving, warm water. It's the irrigation version of leaving a party but locking yourself in another room with the same people. You pass a collapsed culvert near the footpath wooden slats meant to guide water that now just collect it. Someone's thrown a bucket over one end in protest, like that'll help. The bugs hum above it anyway, triumphant. A quirky tidbit? In parts of medieval Venice, residents attempted to fill small stagnant pools with crushed seashells and broken pottery, believing it disrupted the larvae's ability to breathe. Whether it worked, or just gave them sharper puddles to step in, no one really knows. Historians still argue whether peasants genuinely understood the connection between standing water and mosquito breeding, or whether they simply reacted to patterns without fully grasping the biology behind them. But considering how many ditches, drains, and makeshift channels you see even poorly constructed ones, it's clear they were trying something. You stop at a higher point, looking down at the spread of huts and fields. The low areas glitter with tiny, deceptive ponds. Some are meant to be there, others are just accidents, and no one knows what to do with them. Even the most prized water sources ringed with a muddy trench that seems to have been collecting runoff for weeks. You spot a woman tossing bits of soap into it. Keeps the worms out, she says, though whether she means mosquito larvae or something more spiritual, you can't quite tell. And let's be honest, draining anything takes time. Tools are few. Labour is already stretched between farming, thatching, tending animals, surviving. Priorities are a juggle, and bug control doesn't always win. You kick at a clump of moss beside a broken ditch. Water spurts out, then immediately refills, like trying to empty the sea with a spoon. Still, you admire the effort. Wherever people could, they tried. They poked holes in the land, rerouted rain, packed earth into rough dams. Sometimes they dug their own grave-sized pits just to scoop up the overflow. Anything to keep the puddles moving. But the land has a way of laughing back. That night, you walk back past the flooded field. You watch as the moonlight dances on the water's surface, each shimmer a reminder of a bite you haven't yet received. You sigh, adjust your netting, and whisper a quiet apology to the ditch diggers of history. They did what they could, even if the swamp always found a way to rise again. You wake from a dream where your feet weren't covered in bites, and the air didn't hum like a choir of tiny violins, but the dream fades fast. Outside, the familiar buzz is still there, muted, manageable, but never gone. You lie there for a while under your trusty net, listening to the village stir around you. Roosters crow, firewood cracks, a few sleepy curses echo down the lane, and one thought slowly stretches itself across your mind. Did any of it actually work? You've spent weeks slathered in garlic grease, wrapped in scratchy layers, smoked out, prayed up, perched on stilts, and dunked in mud. You've burned herbs, moved uphill, trained duck sort off and slept behind a linen miracle. But still, the bites came. Not as many as before, sure, but enough. Enough to make you scratch your ankle absently right now, even as you ask the question out loud. Was it all just coping? One mainstream historical fact? Despite all the folk remedies and clever improvisations, mosquito-borne illnesses like malaria persisted in medieval Europe well into the 19th century. Known by different names, ague, tertian fever, the shakes. These illnesses shaped where people settled, what crops they planted, and even which seasons they dreaded most. Still, these people fought, with every tool they had, and every belief they clung to. A quirky tidbit? In some regions of the Balkans, villagers believed that if you insulted a mosquito out loud, it would take offense and leave you alone. So, naturally, you hear one man every morning loudly calling them cowards and sky leeches. It hasn't made him any less itchy, but it's good for morale. Historians still argue whether peasants truly believed they were controlling mosquitoes, or if all these efforts were just inherited habit rituals passed down through generations of people who needed to believe they had some control. After all, belief is a powerful thing. And in the grand scheme, that's what most of this was. Not elimination, but mitigation. Not victory, but survival. They couldn't beat the mosquitoes, but they learned to live just outside their reach. You walk the village path slowly, passing a window framed with dried sage. A child inside holds a frog like a knight holds a sword. You pass a hut with long, swinging grass bundles over its doorway, and another with a net patched together from fishing line and cloth scraps. Each one says the same thing. We may not win, but we'll never stop trying. And you realize that's the real takeaway. All of these trick sherbs, fire, fish, prayers, fans of feathers, they weren't foolproof. Most didn't even work the way they thought. But they offered something just as important. A plan, a response, a rhythm, a routine. Because in a world where survival is uncertain, doing anything is better than lying there, arms outstretched, waiting to be bitten. You lie down one last time, pulling the net over your face, your hands still tinged faintly green from yesterday's basil and mint mix. You can hear the mosquitoes outside, knocking on the cloth like uninvited guests. But they won't get in tonight. Not tonight. So here you are, tucked under flax and stars, with the sound of night settling softly around you. The air moves slow now, like it's run out of energy for biting or buzzing or bothering anyone. Even the frogs are quiet. Even the fire has given up its last flicker. Your arms are tired. Your feet have found stillness. The faint scent of mint on your collar is just enough to anchor you in something safe and familiar. You've seen how medieval peasants faced their world not with certainty, but with effort, with persistence, with a little bit of mud, and a whole lot of hope. They didn't have data or science or studies. They had instinct. They had folklore. They had their eyes and ears and bites and bruises, and they learned. They watched the frogs. They smelled the smoke. They tied charms to their belts and nets to their rafters. They built homes that breathed. They kept moving when they had to. And maybe that's the gentlest lesson here. Not every solution needs to be perfect. Some of them just need to get you through the night. So take a breath now. A slow one. Feel your heartbeat settle. Your shoulders soften. Your thoughts start to blur like fog rolling over quiet hills. You're safe here. Biteless. Peaceful. Floating gently above the world that buzzed so loud just a few pages ago. Let your mind rest now. Like still water, no ripples. No worries, no wings. I'll be here again, whenever you need another sleepy story. But for now, good night.